It is chilly outside, so nice and warm in here. Warm hearts. So welcome everybody, welcome to the public, and could I also welcome this morning Te Taru as Chair of Te Tatau. Great to have you here, and if there are questions when Gina presents, we would really appreciate it if you want the opportunity to answer. Thank you. Right, reminder, I don't know how long this meeting will take, but if you just keep your phones off, thank you. And we'll get underway. And I wonder, please, Councillor Wing, if you could open our meeting with a karakia.
E te atua kaharawa, ko koi te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. E nākitia mai mātou, wa pononga I tēnei wā. E mahu nei I a mātou mahi. Mo te painga o ngā tangata o te kaunihira o ngā roto o Rotorua. Tākua mai kia tau te rangi Mārie, ki I runga I a mātou I ngā waka toa. Ko ihu karaiti, hoki tō mātou ariki. Amine.
Right, there are no apologies, so I won't call for apologies, and it's a yes. Councillor Maxwell has signalled that depending on the length of the meeting you may have to leave. Thank you. So no apologies. Any declarations of interest? There appear to be none. Any urgent items? Not. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not strictly an urgent item, but I was just wondering, to my knowledge, we've got 3 meetings scheduled this week, this one, the one tomorrow, and then one on Thursday. And I was wondering why it was necessary to bring us in for this one on its own. I mean, surely it would have slotted nicely into the SPNF meeting. I'm just asking the question. I do have a standing meeting every Monday, but that's irrelevant. I mean, I try to make my time for council, but I mean, we've got 3 meetings, and I would have thought this would have fitted nicely with the SPNF agenda.
Yeah, I'll answer that. I understand tomorrow's workshop has been cancelled.
Oh, right. Thank you.
And this was an urgent item because I was going to a meeting on the 7th of the wider mayors of the region, and so the urgency to get this through prior to the 7th, it is the 4th today. So that was the reason for it today. No, the workshop tomorrow is cancelled, yes. Cancelled or postponed? Postponed. You're here of another date. So thank you for your tolerance of this morning. It was the scheduling of this in time for us to be informed for me to take to the wider mayors region. Of the region meeting. Right, we move now to, yes.
Pardon, you asked for expressions of interest. I am one of the Ngāti Rangatihi people taking our claim through the court, through Parliament at present for the bill. So just wanted to thank you.
We'll note that.
Thank you.
Right, staff reports. We get straight to the report, Mana Whenua Partnerships 3 Waters. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report, that the report Mana Whenua Partnerships 3 Waters be received. Moved, Councillor Donaldson. Seconded, Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Well, thank you, Gina, and thank you to come to the table to overview the report.
Tēnā tātou I aku rangatira. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the haste in which this meeting has been called and the report prepared. The announcements last week really did put a focus on the need for Council to, at pace, meet with our iwi partners and start discussing the implications of the reforms for them. So I will spend a little time on the report because I recognise that people haven't had as much time to, I guess, think about these issues as we might like to have. And really the purpose of this report is to establish a process so that you do have the time that you have the time to engage with our mana whenua partners, to consider the implications and then receive advice on what the options might be. So in terms of, I'll go straight to the background. Prior to establishing the Te Aroha Partnership, as councillors will know, this council went through a period of what I would describe as poor relationships with mana whenua, leading to multiple failed applications for resource consent, or consent conditions that were unfavourable to council. We quickly faced a reality that in order to achieve our key infrastructure objectives, we needed to find a different way of working with mana whenua. In addition, in the last 10 years, a number of treaty settlement processes have occurred within the district, which also create binding obligations for council. Consequently, council currently has a number of formal relationships with mana whenua groups, specifically relating to lakes, springs, rivers and other water bodies. And now I have included in there a list of and sort of key points or key aspects of each of those agreements. What I would note though is that this is not an exhaustive list of all of the relationships that we have with mana whenua.
Yeah.
It is purely identifying the ones that have a formal relationship relevant to infrastructure, but there will be a much wider group of iwi entities that have rights and interests in freshwater, who are not listed necessarily in this list. Probably the first one that I would like to highlight is what was really the first environmental treaty settlement in the country, and that was the Te Aroha Lakes Strategy Group. That was established under the Te Aroha Lakes Settlement Act 2006. It is a permanent joint committee of the Regional Council, the Rotorua Lakes Council and Te Aroha Lakes Trust, and it coordinates policy and actions to improve the Te Aroha Lakes. Some have described that as a co-governance model, and it's been an extraordinarily successful relationship for this council. It has resulted in millions of dollars of Crown funding to support our infrastructure projects, and it's an example where when you have council, Crown and mana whenua working together, you will tend to see more focus on environmental outcomes and social and cultural outcomes for our community. And as a result, we've been able to construct a number of very important wastewater infrastructure programs in particular, with Crown subsidies. There are a number of other important agreements. I'd also like to note the third one on the list there, Te Puna a Peke Hauā, or Taniwha Springs. Councillors will know very well the long history of concern, upset and objection from Ngāti Rangiwiwihi about the use of that spring for water supply. And some 10 years ago, Council applied for a resource consent to take water from Taniwha Springs, or Te Puna Peke Hauā. And the Environment Court, we sought a 35-year consent. The Environment Court gave a 10-year consent with an instruction that that 10 years had to be used to find an alternative because we would not receive consent again. That had serious implications for security of supply for the Rotorua district. By working closely with Ngāti Rangiwiwihi, the relationship has improved to such an extent that not only was there support for a new consent to be applied for, but that is in fact a joint consent. And it's an example of, as far as I'm aware, the only example in the country of council and mana whenua working together to secure a drinking water consent jointly held. In the absence of that sharing of decision making and sharing of responsibility, we would not have consent for the water take on that side of the city. But by working with people, developing strong, robust operating relationships, we have achieved security of supply. What I'm trying to show is that these relationships have grown out of a need to engage differently with mana whenua. That need has put us in a better position as a district to secure consents, to be able to deliver the infrastructure objectives that we need in order to provide for our community today and to provide for growth. Having an oppositional or tense relationships or no relationship at all does not succeed. And that brings us to the Three Waters reform. So we all are aware that in the last, prior to the last central government election, there was the beginnings of a work program around the reform of Three Waters infrastructure. In this term, the government has become much more clear about its expectations and the direction of travel. Leading up to last week, the Minister for Local Government releasing further information regarding the reforms and the proposed entities to be established. And I have up on the screen, this is sourced from the documents released last week. They are available on the Department of Internal Affairs website, and that's the title there, Three Waters Reform Overview A3, 30 June 2021. So if anybody wants to see the original of this document, you can go to the website to find that. That's what it looks like. It's quite detailed and quite difficult to see, so I have printed out a copy for the elected members to look at yourselves. And really what I wanted to show was this screen here, which is just a zoomed in of the top half. So what the Crown is proposing is that local authorities, such as ourselves, would continue to own the assets, at least technically. Local authorities would appoint and be represented by a group of representatives, and that's in the next box down, local authority representatives. Sitting alongside the local authority representatives are representatives appointed by mana whenua. And those two groups to come together onto what will be called a regional representative group, which then appoints and monitors an independent selection panel. The independent selection panel will appoint and monitor the members on the entity board. Okay? So this is a transformational change to the way in which decisions and governance across Three Waters infrastructure will be led. You will have formal processes for local authorities and mana whenua to be sitting together to define what our performance expectations are, to define a statement of intent for that entity board, and to together appoint the members of the board. I just want to be clear that this is still a proposal, and that the detail of what this means is still to be defined. But on the basis of what has been released, there is no question that Rotorua Lakes Council would be sitting at that local authority body, and we would be looking for people whose interests are aligned with ours. And I'd suggest that the iwi that live in this area, in this district, are probably our closest allies in terms of ensuring that the level of service that we receive, the environmental outcomes we receive, the funding that this district receives, is of a sufficient nature for our growth aspirations. So going into this new reform and these new entities, it is important that we have good relationships with mana whenua, because we will need those when we are at the table together. So going back to my report, at the bottom of page 7, Council and mana whenua partners have entered into good faith relationships, and that's what I've already detailed in the previous section, supported by legally binding commitments. There is currently no formal process for Council and our mana whenua partners to discuss these reforms, to identify the risks and opportunities and to coordinate our respective responses to the proposed reforms and our relationship commitments. So presently, we are engaging with DIA, and separately, iwi are engaging with DIA, but we don't have a formal process to align ourselves with our iwi partners at this stage. The options available to you on the next page include the status quo, which is that we continue to separately engage and have no forum for discussing the impact of the reforms on our existing agreements, nor for developing a unified, coordinated council iwi position. The second option is that we engage with each Te Aroha entity separately to identify potential impacts and seek agreement on how to respond. And the third option is that rather than dealing with everybody individually and in a separate way, so we come together collectively and establish a council committee as a forum for governance oversight to identify and develop our shared concerns and aspirations, to understand the effects of the reforms on our existing agreements, and to ensure well-informed, coordinated decision-making of the parties. It's important to note that what I am suggesting is a power of recommendation, and that's appropriate because it recognises the separate roles and responsibilities of Te Aroha and of Council. It is an approach that is based on mana orite, or separate but equal authority, and it allows for the partners' different roles and responsibilities to be upheld while still ensuring that we're informed and working together. So neither party is predominating over the other. We are trying to find our areas of mutual concern, provide advice back to our relevant principals, which is the elected members of council and the elected members of Te Aroha. I have included in there the legal framework. This will be familiar to you as it is the same framework that we use for all council committees. And I'll take the rest of the report as read because it's essentially machinery. Are there any questions through the chair?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. Thanks for your report, Gina. Just at this stage, do we have any sense of what the iwi and hapu view is of the setting up of this and the adequacy of 5 members to represent them?
There have been initial discussions with some individuals within those entities, but I would not say that we have had the time to obtain official views from each of the entities. So while from my informal discussions, people have been very supportive of the need for a forum, I wouldn't like to say that a particular organisation has actually made a decision. Te Aroha are accustomed to coming together and choosing representatives to sit on another body, so I don't think there'll be any difficulty in that. What's important is that those 5 representatives are giving advice back to the relevant principals. They don't have the power to bind each of those organisations because there are only 5.
Point to Taru, if there were a question of you, would you like to come and sit beside Gina? So I don't want you speaking from the gallery. As our partnership chair, right, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Gina, for the report. So would I liken this committee to be similar to what has been set up with the Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group? Sort of equal.
If I can step back and say there is often a lot of anxiety and assumptions about what the words co-governance and co-management mean. It's an area that I've worked in for at least the last 15 years, including negotiating some of the co-governance frameworks that exist. My experience is that every committee, every co-governance settlement has been tailored to the particular needs of the taonga that is being addressed and the community that is being involved. So you have a huge range of mechanisms available. The Te Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group is a committee with four partners, including the Crown, Regional Council, Local Council, District Council, iwi and Ministry for the Environment. In that case, as with most co-governance groups, they tend to try to work by consensus. It is very rare that you have a vote and an overriding of a vote, although that does happen and there is freedom for that to happen. But generally, what people try to do in those kinds of forums is talk through the issues until there's a reasonable level of comfort around what the right decision is that addresses the needs of all the parties. I would expect the same kind of approach for this entity. It is a case of trying to find common issues, shared concern, to really understand, first and foremost, to understand what the different values and positions are of the parties, so that we can find outcomes that everybody can support, while still allowing the freedom to disagree when we need to. And that really is the marker of a robust relationship or a robust partnership, is that you can disagree and understand and respect the reasons why the other party might disagree. So this particular committee would have a recommendatory function, but its purpose really is to understand each other's views, to try and find, wherever possible, shared agreements, and to understand why we disagree when we do disagree. In that regard, I think it is very similar to the Te Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group, although the mechanisms might be slightly different.
I wondered, Te Taru, if you'd like to give an overview. Sometimes you're an alternate member on the Te Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group as a regional councillor about that role. Sorry?
No, Madam Chair, I just wonder if councils, before Te Taru speaks, can council, please, can we have councils? This is really significant, and I appreciate that Te Taru has a view or would like to share some comments, but I'd like to hear more of this, please, because there is a tendency then to pick up on that and we can go in another direction, and I don't want that to happen. Okay. Thank you.
I'll accept that. I'll speak to that myself later. Right. Right, another question, Councillor Maxwell, or has yours been answered? No. Thank you. Councillor Rotorua, and then Councillor Tapsell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I consider the Three Waters reform to be significant for New Zealand, and I suspect most councils around the country and even the general public, apart from iwi, of course, consider this to be really significant. But we do have to get out of the gate first, because we do show the way in our country on what cooperation, co-governance and indeed partnership is all about. We are an example to New Zealand of that. But on this one, we have to get out of the gate quickly. We've already heard from Gina this morning around the tense relationship that our council has had in the past with mana whenua here in relation to waters. And it's not only a tense relationship. If we don't get that right into the future, in fact, it will be costly to our ratepayers. Let me be in no doubt about that. Let us be in no doubt about that, and we don't want to go backwards. So I'm really pleased that this paper has come to us at this stage, and I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning. But something to me is that whenever I see that we're determining as a council, I know this is the council going to be a committee of council, I just always feel a bit uneasy when we suggest 5 representatives of mana whenua. I would like to suggest that we could suggest to them a number of 5, but you know, they always get a bit apprehensive. Mana whenua always get a bit apprehensive when they say they're being told that we'll talk to you with 5, and I suppose Te Taru will answer that, but I always find that a little bit I get a bit uncomfortable when I see numbers put down and say we'll bring our 5 and then they bring their 5, and sometimes that's at the start of any relationship that gets up the nose of mana whenua, from my experience.
I'll stick to your request that we answer questions through Gina. Gina, would you like to answer why that figure was proposed?
I'd like to say there was a formula, But essentially I looked at what's a practical number in terms of staff reporting to and making sure people that are informed. It can be more or less as the elected members see fit. I was simply trying to choose a number that would allow for good discussion, but also effective decision making if a group gets too large. But there was certainly, it could be more or less as the elected members see fit.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. The question that I have is an obvious one around the iwi boundaries of Te Aroha, which span from Maketu all the way to Tongariro, and we have 52 different iwi and hapu within that area. So I understand the complexities of only having 5 mana whenua representatives, and the question I have is whether there's a possibility to also have alternate members. Now, when I've sat on Te Maru o Kaituna, this is an opportunity. So although you have 10 at the table, each member also has an alternate or support person. So shall there be an instance where they're not able to be at the table, the alternate would also be at the table. But in doing so, you also allow a few more voices and a few more heads to be at that table when making those decisions. And I just say that because, say, even with council's 5, if 2 of us are unwell or busy with council business, I don't want the discussions to be lesser because we aren't able to have a full table, because I fully understand and appreciate the importance of getting a combined view as soon as possible in these issues. My question is just around, first of all, around the boundaries. So I'm presuming the mana whenua will be of the Rotorua district area of which this council represents, not all the way of, not the entire Te Aroha iwi boundaries. And the second question is whether there would be the possibility to explore having alternate members. As an example, I would see a natural alternate member to myself being my Deputy Chair, Councillor Yates, as an example, but there could be many other examples.
In respect of the boundaries, it would be focused on the district council boundaries, and so there are numerous iwi and hapu within that boundary in itself. In terms of the second question around alternates, there is nothing to stop the councillors from having a provision for alternates. I would express a caution, though, that it does make it difficult in terms of continuity of decision making and information, so it would be important that alternates are actively keeping abreast of the discussions so that they're not coming in cold partway through an ongoing conversation. In that regard, whether you have alternates or not, there must be good reporting and good communication back to the wider Te Aroha groups, and at an operational level, ourselves and Te Tatau, I'm sure, would be facilitating that and making sure that people are getting information and know what's happening, which is a mechanism to support the Te Aroha representatives to be good representatives, so that they are letting people know what's going on, but also being informed of it themselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Gina. I have a question, but I've also wanted to know this new system for 3 waters delivery, irrespective of what we decide around here, we have to come to a deadline and decide that this is how it's going to be with the way the entities are served. But it's not a concern, but just an inquiry that the recommended names are all of Maori descent, is to have diversity and a way of thinking. Is it possible for the council to think that somebody outside the square could come over in and contribute the same way?
Point of order, Your Worship. If Councillor Kumar is suggesting I'm of Maori descent, I want to put the record straight. I'm not.
Your question, Councillor Kumar, is there anybody else that could be considered?
Yes, so for the benefit of those at home, no, the suggested members are not all of Māori descent. I think 3 are of 5, 2 are not. But more importantly, those names are people who are already sitting on the partnership boards and the protocol boards that council already operates. So these are people who are already familiar with the partnership agreements that are the subject of the council committee being proposed. Of course, other members can be appointed. There's nothing that's not a restraint. But I was simply suggesting that because the council committee is focusing on partnership agreements, it's probably useful to appoint people who are already involved in that. And just to remind ourselves that the representatives on those, the council representatives on those protocol committees were appointed at a council meeting beginning of last year.
Gina, and they're also chairs and deputies so that the work stream flows back into our committees of council. Any other questions? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Morning, folks. Good to see you both. The background to my question is that it's been made clear that this joint committee being proposed is going to be a committee of council. It will have recommendatory powers only, and that to me is important because the decision must come back to this elected council. It's democratically legitimate forum for deciding our views on these matters. So my question is this, that given the diversity within council itself, had not thought been given to representing the diversity of views on council rather than seeing the same familiar names being put up for membership of this committee?
Yes, so as noted already, the focus was on existing experience.
Are there any other questions to Gina? And then I will open them up to Tataru.
I'm
yes,
sorry,
Councillor.
could I be supplementary?
Yes.
Yes, the answer to my question was, it was put down to experience. My question was, quite precisely, had thought been given to getting a better representation of the diversity of council itself? I need to signal this because from the perspective of ratepayers that I know extremely well, this group only has a reasonable but not a complete understanding of the views of ratepayers. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. It's not for me to comment on the particular views and political positions of elected members. All I can say is that as a staff member, I'm aware that elected members take an oath to represent the views of all of the district, and I obviously respect that is the position that every member takes. In terms of the names that were suggested there, again, it was simply just those who are appointed to existing committees.
And my final point is that the appointments to those committees are the gift of the Mayor. They are not represented necessarily of the diversity of this committee, but I thank you for your answers. Kia ora.
That's a statement rather than a question then. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's just a question. Sorry.
Just a correction. Although they were nominated by the Mayor, it was a council resolution.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Gina, just wanted to clarify the relationship with Te Tātou Aotearoa. So in your paper, so are we only using Te Tātou as a mechanism to identify a wider representation group rather than using the existing membership of Te Tātou Aotearoa?
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. Te Tātou Aotearoa has a particular role in terms of council committees and partnership with council in terms of our decision making. In this case, because we are talking specifically about the impact on existing relationship agreements, it was considered that those entities that are the partners in those relationship agreements should choose their representatives. Having said that, I would expect that, so we have asked Te Tatau to help us to facilitate that meeting, to find the 5 agreed Te Aroha representatives. I would expect that it is likely that at least one of those members will probably be drawn from Te Tatau, and I would also expect that those 5 representatives would have an ongoing communication with Te Tatau. Because of course, any decisions that do come back will need to go through the council committees where Te Tatau are represented. So Te Tatau will want to be appraised of what's happening in those committees. They'll want to know what's going on so that they can make their decisions in the light of those discussions, just as you as councillors will do the same. So it wasn't considered appropriate to only rely on Te Tatau though, because we are dealing with actual particular agreements with other bodies. In terms of the role of Te Tatau, they will continue to consider these issues at the committee level before it goes to the full council. Is that a question that Te Tatau should also respond to?
Questions to Te Taru. If anybody does, it was that opportunity. Te Taru, would you like to say?
E te manukura tēnā koe, me koutou hukinga me mō te kaunihira, tēnā koutou. He mihi ana ki a koe, Councillor Wang, mō tō karakia mō tātou e tēnei rā, e pai ana tō kōrero tō tōreo. Nō reira, tēnā koe. Well, Tatau has always stated that it would never be in a position to impugn the right of mana whenua. And you have mana whenua protocols now that you deal directly with them. There are co-governance arrangements through legislation and treaty settlements. That is the role, and we see the right of mana whenua to be in those spaces. And we see ourselves as an enabler, not necessarily somebody that needs to be around that decision table. The mana whenua should be around that decision table, in our view. Having said that, it is rather a challenge to collectivise, if you like, our people into that space where they are an effective and a functioning collective. They value their mana whenua-ship very strongly. And one of the challenges that the council may have, even in this type of structure, is that there will be those that will be determined to go directly to government on such matters. And that is likely. So the issue of being able to constrain to 5 members will be challenging, is all I'm saying. I understand the pace at which this has had to happen. The question that mana whenua will say, and those out there will say, well, when are you going to socialise this with us? When are you going to have a conversation with us where we can participate in what you're putting up here? When we fully understand, then we will participate, potentially. And I always put that question mark after it, because some of you will know some of the challenges of collectivising a Te Aroha voice at the moment. But that's always been the case. Te Aroha will come together when Te Aroha deems it to be necessary. So in that space, where do I see Tatau Te Aroha as being an enabler in the conversation? Certainly not a decision maker, as we have always said. When it's necessary, we will lead according to our mandate. But when it requires mana whenua to be front and centre, which is such an occasion like this, then, Madam Mayor, we would step back, support, connect, communicate, but at the end of the day, mana whenua will make their decision. And the difficulty, and I'll emphasise this, is the fact that how do you get them around the table? 5 probably won't be enough, let me put it that way.
Yeah. Thank you, Te Taru. And Councillor Donaldson, you put the motion?
Yes, Your Worship. I'm happy to move parts 2, 3, 4 and 5 with an addition to part 3 that the 5 councillors named plus alternatives appointed by yourself, to be appointed by yourself, and that the 5 representatives of mana whenua with alternatives to be discussed. And yeah, I'm happy to move in that direction.
Councillor Tapsell?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for allowing me to speak again. But with the recommendation, I would be happy for that to go as a recommendation to the committee themselves, because of course the mana whenua may have an idea on what they want to do with alternates as well. So not preempting that that may be the best option, but just ensuring that it's allowed to be an option if deemed to be valuable.
So just to clarify, you're happy for the councillor's name to have and alternates, but not...
Sorry, for all to have alternates, but I want to allow the committee, once they're formed, to decide whether alternates is a good option for them. So that's a suggestion from myself now as appropriate before it is set up, but only recommended as a suggestion instead of formalising it right now, because I do want mana whenua to have that option, because going to them saying we will have 5 members is very different to saying we will have 5 members plus another 5 alternate members. And I think that those members of the main members and alternate should be able to be selected after having a discussion with mana whenua too about that option.
Thank you.
So maybe plus the option of having alternates to be discussed at the committee.
Not plus. The option. We'll just get this right. Yep, we've got that. We're just writing it up for... Read it out, G. I can read it out, G. Oh.
So that's just a supplementary.
It's a supplementary with the option of alternatives also to be appointed. All right? With that added, and the keyboard will be adjusted accordingly. You're happy to second, Councillor Tapsell? Thank you. Right, we open now for a round of discussion. Does anybody wish to speak to this? Councillor Donaldson is the mover.
Thank you, Worship. As the mover, as mentioned by my colleague, Councillor Rotorua Tate, we do need to be ahead of the pack, as we've shown ourselves to be in the past on this fast-moving process, Your Worship. I also recall from the workshop, the first Three Waters workshop at the Holiday Inn, the angst in the room when a separate forum was provided for iwi groups, and the rest of us stayed in the body of the room. 1 or 2 iwi members remained because they were concerned about what they were missing out of. So this is a case where, as a TLA, we need to be moving te poko hiwi ki te poko hiwi, shoulder to shoulder with mana whenua. So, yeah, and it also needs to be a forum that operates with a high level of trust. I like the suggestion of alternatives because I know from experience at some of these, and I'm on the top 5 of those partnership groups, sometimes there's difficulty getting a quorum because of other commitments, principally. So I like the suggestion around alternatives, but apart from that, I think this is an important step forward in the way we address this fast-moving process being driven by central government. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish? Councillor Rotorua Tate?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think any of us here around this table underestimate the piece of work that's going to go on in this area. And it isn't about the diversity of council representation on this committee. It's about knowing this business. It's about knowing this business and being respected by mana whenua. When you sit down at the table, you sit down and you discuss things in good faith. And you need to bring some expertise and knowledge to the table, rather than thinking, well, I want diversity and this sort of nonsense. You actually have to have the knowledge to be able to discuss with good faith, in good faith, and also with the view to an outcome that will be beneficial to not only to iwi or to mana whenua, but to all the citizens of Rotorua, because we know what has happened in the past when the diversity has been one-sided, and it's been at a great cost to our ratepayers in Rotorua. So, but I'm absolutely pleased that you are going, Madam Chair. You're having a meeting with local mayors, because from what I have seen so far from local mayors, they're all over the place. They're actually all over the place. They're ill-informed. They're not sure what they're doing. Some of them, even at this early stage, are putting their hand up to opt out, and all of this sort of thing. So, you know, they need to be quite informed about what's happening, not only locally, but nationally as well, all around the country, and get an idea of what other people are doing as well. So I don't underestimate the work that's going to have to go into this. And some people might say it's a learning exercise for councils, but I have to tell you that mana whenua have been down this track before, and they are well armed to sit at the table now and to take on the government, national government in this area. So I'm just saying, watch the space. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I note the willingness of some of my colleagues to make prior judgments about the capacities, the expertise, the knowledge of other people around the table. I think that's
just as you did.
That's inappropriate. And I'd like to be heard, if I could, without interruptions.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We've got to decide whether or not we believe that it's important to include diverse voices in such decision-making, but if it's not to be because of the way that this is being handled, then so be it. But I would say that the views that I've heard so far, especially with respect to co-governance, these views are not universally shared amongst our ratepayers by any means. These are controversial.
Order, Madam Chair. He wouldn't know what the views of the ratepayers are.
With respect, if
70,000 in this city.
If I might be heard in silence, I'd appreciate that.
No, but you're open to challenge when you do make statements, Councillor McPherson. We are all here to represent the interests of our community, much wider. Carry on.
Thank you very much. As I said, with respect to the diverse views of ratepayers, there is a great diversity of views on the appropriateness and the manner in which co-governance is being advanced. And it remains my view that that should primarily be the view of the elected representatives to represent our views with regard to the government's Three Waters reform. I'll leave matters there. Thank you.
Well, I wish to speak to this because this is about expertise, quite frankly. And if I go back to 2006, and it was the first model in New Zealand, and then came Tainui with the river, co-governance on the river. We were early leaders in 2006 with setting up Rotorua Lakes strategy program that has grown into a massive program now for co-investment, actually. District Council, Regional Council, iwi and central government. So we're real leaders in this respect, and it's worked well. And actually nobody's challenged that as a co-governance model. It's worked well for us and is helping us with our water quality. Thank you, Gina, also for going through these other very interesting statutory bodies as well as memorandums of understanding and relationship entities, because this is the way that we're taking this community forward. In this case, Te Taro, I'm glad you came to the table today as a partner to this council. And I probably did compromise you earlier by asking you to speak of what does it feel like to be an alternate on the Rotorua strategy group at times. And it was the point that Councillor Donaldson made, that sometimes with our commitments we can't be there and you need an alternative that's skilled to sit at that diverse table there. So that was set up back in 2006 and has worked glowingly well for our district. And it was building on that model, as well as our partnership, that made us think we've got to be ready when we go out with what does this look like for us, for our waters and our people and our entities with whom we have a relationship. So, as you said, Te Tato is an enabler. There's going to be a lot of work around this. Te Rotorua Lakes strategy are certainly up for the conversation as well, and I'm sure all our other partnership entities are keen to get together to see how big this piece of work is. And we understand iwi reserving the right to deal directly with the Crown, of course. That goes without saying. I think the rest of the country will be looking at us to say, what are they doing in Rotorua? Because we have got great models now of co-governance. So have Tainui, so have others now, because they've learned. Top of the South has got co-governance models there, and they're not something that is just being dreamed up at the moment to take this issue forward. I think the conversation really is how big and how fast this is moving, and our ability to be prepared to take forward our view, our collective view, is the very important reason why we are recommending the establishment of this committee, and it won't come as a surprise to anybody in the wider region. So the Three Waters work remains a big issue for us. This will give us a strengths-based perspective to add into the Three Waters discussion. As you remember, as councillors, we said what our negotiables and our not negotiables were, and I want to demonstrate a real partnership when we go forward into that discussion. So I'm proud to be voting in support of this committee today. And I'm sure there will be some movements, and I'm also pleased, Gina, that you said quite correctly that this must come back to committees of council, any recommendations from this committee. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Worship. Could I have a right of reply just to
Yes.
a couple of points? And it was just the one made by Councillor McPherson about alternative views on co-governance. And this is precisely why this subcommittee or committee cannot operate in a atmosphere where the actual notion of co-governance is being challenged. And it is recommendatory to council, and it's at full council when the recommendations come forward that those alternate views on co-governance can be raised by any member who wishes to do so. So that's simply my view there, and I'll be voting in support. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to put the motion. You've missed, he had a right of reply, sorry. There is no other discussion. So that, yeah, we did, but that's the right of reply. So I'm going to put the motion now, 2, 3, 4 and 5. All those in favour, please raise your right hand. All those against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Yes, we'll record it. Thank you, Gina, and thank you to Taro for coming to the table today. Very important for us, and yes, with some urgency. And there is morning tea in the green room. I declare the meeting closed.